Hello, my name is Lillian Agbegbe and this is LA Lenses. Happy Mother's Day to all the fabulous mothers out there. In honor of Mother's Day, I decided to do something related to my mom. If my mom had been alive, she'll have been 81 yesterday. But my mom has gone away and I thought I will share 12 lessons to mark May 12th, which was her birthday, 12 lessons that I learned from my mother. No prizes for guessing the first one. The first one is you can't do too much for your mother. And so it was at the time where my grandmother had taken ill and she was sort of expected to be dying sometime soon. Now, I come from somewhere in Delta State, Nigeria, where we have the traditional practices of burying people in their home. And so my mother went to her mother's people and asked them if my grandmother died, would they allow her to bury her in Sapele, which was the city where my grandmother was living, even though that wasn't the city where she was from. And they said, yeah, sure, she's been there forever. They can bury her there. Well, so my mother went and then built a house in Sapele because she wanted to bury her mom in the house and built a house in Sapele for my mom. And when my grandmother's people from her village in Okwawari saw that my mom had built a house, they were like, no. We're sorry, that was a mistake. You can't bury her in Sapele. You have to come and bury her in Okwawari. I thought my mom was going to throw a fit. It's like, I've already built this house. I'm expecting to bury my mom here. But she was like, if they insist that this was what they wanted, she went ahead and built another house in Okwawari so that she could bury her mom. Sadly enough, though, she preceded my grandmother in death, which was rather unfortunate. But I just thought that, it was an extra measure. My mom always did an extra, and maybe because she was an only child, so there was nobody else to share the responsibility of loving my mom, my grandmother, but she really put a lot to the table. So you can't do too much for your mom. The second thing I like to say is your beginning does not have to define your ending. My grandfather was a fisherman from Omualaja, and my mom went on to become an international businesswoman. And so even though grandfather was a fisherman, grandmother was a petty trader, she went on to become an international businesswoman. So your beginning doesn't have to define your ending. My third point is after your pain, live again. My brother Kerry had been killed in 1978, and I saw my mother become a shadow of herself. And she literally was just existing and not really living. But one day we were in the car and this song came on, His Eyes on the Sparrow, and I Know He Watches Over Me. And mother cried throughout the song. And after that, life came back to her and she really became involved in life, in a family, in society. And so after your pain, you really can live again. Number 4, think outside the box. So like I said, my mother was an only child. If you know a lot of Nigerians, they tend to be very caustic, and one day she said she was having a misunderstanding with someone and the person said to her, you're a very wicked person. And she was like, me? She was like, yes, you're your mother's only child, you're your father's only child. If you're not very wicked, some other person should have come into your family. And so in thinking outside the box, my mother went and married a wife for my grandfather. And because she married a wife for my grandfather, she ended up having a stepbrother and a stepsister, and they were the love of her life. So sometimes think outside the box. I don't think standardly children marry for their parents, but in this case, my mother wanted siblings, and so she married a wife for her dad. And number 5 point is when you can help, don't wait to be asked. My mother was always very selfless, always going out, giving money, time, anything that she wanted to do. She had been through a tough time, she said, and she didn't want anybody to go through the sort of tough time that she had been through. And so whenever it was possible, she didn't even wait whether somebody asked her or not. She just went ahead and stepped in. Number 6 is value your friends. There was one day a mother went out and she came back and we told her a friend who had gone out of town had come, and my mother just dropped her bag and she was about to pick it up and she was about to run out of the house. And I was like, hey, mommy, you haven't had dinner yet. And so she grudgingly came back and had dinner, but she really valued her friends, always went over and above, which was why it hurt me when that friend didn't come to my mother's funeral. But I just think that when somebody's your friend, you go the extra length. And so last week I lost a friend of mine, and they had a celebration of life for her in Texas. On Wednesday, I flew into Texas and flew out of Texas on Wednesday to be there for a celebration of life. So one of the things I learned from my mother, how to appreciate and celebrate your friends. And number 7 is let your motherly instinct rule. Let your motherly instinct rule. So I was my father's favorite child. I always liked to get away with anything and everything. My mother was having none of it. And I'm sure if my mother could rise up today and come and hear all the accolades that I called her, she probably just died from shock again. It's like, this is impossible. But no, because my father was letting me get away with everything, my mother was like, this is not happening. And so she made me her de facto assistant. And because I was a de facto assistant, I learned how to run a house, how to take care of family, and those things, which I really resented when I was learning them, by the way, because I thought, oh my goodness, it's just really my mom. But over the years, those things that she insisted that I should learn, because my father was going to let me get away with doing nothing, but the things that kicked in had really brought me very far. So let your motherly instincts kick in, and let your child learn what they need to learn. It goes into number 8, which says, learn from your environment. As this day, I thought, okay, I got this woman today, because she said to me, she said, oh my goodness, you don't know how to cook. And I laughed. I'm like, sorry. She said, you don't know how to bake. And I laughed, and I was like, mother, I've never seen you bake before. You don't know how to bake. So how are you holding me accountable for not knowing how to bake when you can't bake and you didn't teach me how to bake? She's pointing on me. She said, your friend Kenny, doesn't Kenny bake? Of course I know Kenny bakes because Kenny has brought cake home for my mom. She's like, you spend a lot of time with Kenny, don't you? I'm like, yes. She's like, so all this time you're with Kenny, why didn't you ask her to teach you how to bake one of these days? And I was like, oh my goodness, is it that simple? And she was like, yes. You don't have to go there and play all the time. Your friend can bake, you can bake, you're hanging out together. You should be able to learn from her. Learn from your environment. Don't let your environment define you. Learn from your environment. And so that was a good one. The number 9 is somewhat related to learning from your environment. It's also paying attention to the things that are happening that you can learn from. So we had gone on a vacation, and we're going to spend some time with my cousin in New York. And my mom was like, okay, time for food. And his wife was like, I can't cook. My mom was like, what do you mean you can't cook? She was like, yeah, I can't cook. My mother didn't teach me how to cook. And we had a vacation. We thought everything was fine. We got back home to Nigeria, and my mom was like, you girls are going to start cooking. I said to my father, I think your wife needs help. This isn't happening. There's nobody. The reason why we have a cook is so that we can't cook. What does she mean we're going to start cooking? And so my mother was like, do you guys remember when we were visiting your cousin in New York? Could his wife cook? And we're like, no. What did she say? She said her mother didn't teach her how to cook. So my mother was like, did she say her father didn't let her mother teach her how to cook? Like, no, she said her mother didn't teach her how to cook. And that was it. My father just looked at us and like, sorry girls, I can't help you. And that was the end of that. And that's how we started cooking. So it was just so instructive to us though, because that was an episode that happened and we thought, all was fine and dandy, and not knowing that my mother had really recorded something that she was going to change because of what had happened. And then number 10 is grow with your children. Grow with your children. And it was when I was growing up, at one time, my mom was like very, very particular about what you wore and everything. And there's this day my mom came to me and she was like, can I borrow those your white shoes? I like almost passed out, because my mom was like very strict and all of that. I was like, oh my goodness, I have something that my mother thinks that, she can wear. She was always very critical of what we wore. So to find out that my mother was going to wear something that I wore was really very, very soothing for me. And it was one of the things, grow with your children. Sometimes you can think, yeah, these kids, they don't know what they're doing. But when you begin to see that they know what they're doing, you should be able to appreciate them and let them know that, you're with them. Number 11, by no means anything, but really appreciate God for what God has done for you and how far God has brought you from. And there's this day my mom was going out, and she opened like all these wardrobes and all these clothes, and she just started to cry. And I'm like, I don't see why you're crying. And she was like, is this me? I'm like, what do you mean, is this you? And she told me what I absolutely didn't know. Apparently, my mother had been a street trader. In Nigeria, you call them hawkers. She's been somebody who used to put a tray on her head and go from street to street selling stuff. I didn't know. That wasn't happening when I was born. And she'd really struggled through the things. And I was like, really? But she looked at herself. And now she wasn't sitting there and saying, yeah, I've arrived. But she was just like, God, I'm so grateful for where you took me from and where you brought me to. And I think I learned that to really appreciate God, whatever is going on in my life, to really say, I give the glory unto God. And I wanted to end on a really light note to number 12 thing that I learned from my mother: fight with style. This is what the believer will say: apply your heart under wisdom. And as a Wafarian, I will say, everything not be gra. And so there was this day my dad was going to go to my half brother's event and was going to play as if he was a husband. And my mom didn't want to like really make a fuss, but she just told me, check what your dad's wearing. And we got something really regal for her to wear. And as my dad closed the door of his room to go out, my mom closed the door of her room and she came out and she was all dressed up. And my father said to her, where are you going all dressed up? And she said she put it on me. She was like, oh, Lillian said you're wearing this elaborate outfit and she didn't think that, you should go where you're going to without your wife. So she decided I should get dressed up and that's why I'm dressed up to go. And my father said, well, I'm actually going to, my half-brother's grandfather's place. So like, oh, yes, he's been inviting me. This will be a good opportunity for me to go. So I got on the car and they went. Shortly afterward, they were back in the house. And I said to my mom, she said, yeah, when they were driving halfway, my father said he wasn't feeling fine. And then he came back. And so at the end of the day, what my mother didn't want is go out and be like you, somebody's husband, when I'm your wife and I'm at home. But she did make it force. But at the end of the day, that didn't happen because my father came back and said he was sick. So, hey, happy Mother's Day to you all wonderful mothers. We really appreciate you. Biological mothers, stepmothers, community mothers, all the wonderful things that you're doing. I hope you have a really nice day. I'm wearing this badge because my mother says I should wear it. She says, you're the best mom. And I'm so glad that you all are wonderful mothers. Happy Mother's Day to you. Thank you.